Hey guys, it's the first Tatas Tuesday of 2016, and I'm going to shift gears a little bit. You may be wondering, what the hell does a Rocky movie have to do with something involving feminist thought? Well, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about masculinity in gaming. Because masculinity in gaming gets a terrible rap. Terrible. Unfairly so. And I saw this movie this weekend. I went to see it with my mom. My mom and I see the most unmom movies because they're the only movies we can agree on. I don't see chick flicks, like, ever, unless it's, under extreme duress. And this movie, first of all, it's a glorious movie. And I'm not gonna do a lot of plot spoilers. I'm just gonna sort of talk about theme. And the thing I've always loved about the Rocky franchise, which is, one of my favorite movie franchises of all time. And I'll move down to the picture there. There we go. There's Sylvester Stallone. I think the Rocky franchise is one of the greatest movie franchises. Well, certainly one of my favorites. I mean, greatest in film. There's so much film that's so different. It's hard to say what's the greatest. But I just think, in terms of kinetic action and then a ton of very raw emotion, you can't do better in terms of a combination than Rocky films. And yeah, okay, there were some lousy ones in the middle there. You kind of had Rocky 1, Rocky 2, Mr. T, WTF is going on for a few, and then Rocky Balboa. And Rocky Balboa is a great film, and so is Creed. But watching Creed made me think about how, it was sort of a bonding film, a male bonding film. And I thought that was great. And it was a lot of moments of vulnerability, a lot of moments of weakness. And the Rocky films more and more have become more stories of resilience than stories of power. And you know how it's set up. It's like, it's always this unbeatable situation, this fight he can't win. And, he pulls out, the boxer in question pulls out some sort of moral victory, even if he doesn't necessarily win the title. And I thought about that in gaming, and that's the sort of masculinity we see in gaming a lot too. And it's really misunderstood. Because like in boxing, where it's sort of beat the crap out of the other guy, a lot of gaming is some really deep emotional content underneath a lot of headshots and, dismemberments. And the important thing to know about gaming and the important thing to know about gamers is we'll play a game that doesn't have that blood and guts. But that doesn't mean it's not a space we want to explore. We don't want to explore. I mean, we don't necessarily want to shy away from violence completely. It's a part of the human condition. And a lot of us were very badly bullied in some way or another as kids. And so we sort of want to explore those violent spheres without consequence, without fear. Right? And, I mean, the irony of me loving Rocky is I tried boxing once. I was terrible at it. I don't have the upper body strength. I don't have the hand strength. I don't even have the ability to put the gloves on properly. I can't make a fist. I can't box. So me loving this thing, it's obviously something vicarious, right? And I mean, these are movies that on the surface I shouldn't be able to identify with at all, but the themes of survival and moral victory, of just facing down unwinnable situations when you're the underdog, is universal. And that's a lot of the setup of games, isn't it? You start off as this underdog, this level 1 underdog, and then you end up, you don't necessarily do all the things at the end. More and more games don't allow you to win at life. But there is some sort of victory at the end. And I don't necessarily think that's power fantasy so much as I think it's maybe fortitude fantasy. Um, Strength and power are not necessarily the same thing. I think that a lot of times strength kicks in, at least that, moral fortitude kicks in when you're not in a position of power. And, you may be able to hit things really hard, but there's always somebody who can hit harder. And you might be really fast, but there's always somebody who's faster. And the thing I love about Rocky films and the character of Rocky Balboa, and the thing I love about so many video games, is he's just got this simple, lovable human core to him. He's such a well-defined character, and he approaches problems so simply. And I think that's the appeal of video games sometimes as well, that choices, even the difficult ones in games, are relatively simple compared to the ones in real life. And there's this certitude that you have when playing video games, that you're cast in the lead role. You're cast in the role of inevitable hero. And so that sort of whatever choice you do make, it's not going to be the end of the world. And we don't have that certainty in life. And so as much as I think it's exceptionally important for us to not just only consume violent games, I think that there is a place for violent video games that isn't this, toxic masculinity and disposable male concept that a lot of the traditional scholarship labels it. I think there's a lot more to these products. And I think that we need to stop repeating this power fantasy paradigm by rote, because we're missing a lot of what's underneath it. And how do we do that without a vocabulary? That's the difficult thing. And we've got this disconnect right now where gamers are saying one thing, and it makes sense to us, but it's not in the language of academia, so people don't quote it in journal. And I mean, it's sort of like Rocky Balboa walking in and lecturing at a university. Be hilarious because he uses these layman's metaphors for things. He doesn't understand cloud computing. He doesn't understand things like types of cancers. He keeps referring to what his wife died of as lady cancer. And we never hear more about that. We don't know if it's breast cancer, cervical cancer, ovarian cancer. It's lady cancer. He's that simple. And, he hit things for a living, and then he ran a restaurant. And that's sort of what's going on with we have this subculture and we have our terminologies and we know what those mean. And even though they shift, we all sort of shift in understanding together. And so we essentially know what we mean. But then talking to somebody who doesn't understand that the culture, there's this disconnect. And, one of the things I've been trying to do, since I do speak passable academic ease, is try to, first of all, create terms, but also try to translate one set of terms to another set of terms. And people distrust me because they hear me using a term from academia, but you're not a real gamer. Because well, yeah, I am, guys. I'm speaking a second language. Okay, I get it. I'm with you. But somebody's got to go out there and translate so that the rest of the world sort of understands what we're on about. So this stupid moral panic stops. Because the people who have bought into this moral panic, they're not bad people. And they're not as numerous as we once thought. Yay for that. But they're not bad people, and they deserve to understand, and they deserve to sort of have a window because, who knows? Maybe once they get into it, they'll really like games too. And they may not necessarily like the same games we like, but they'll find something that fits them. And, that's another one of the themes of Creed, which again, I absolutely recommend you go see, is the idea that just because it's like the smart thing to do in life or the right thing to do in life doesn't necessarily mean that it answers the question an individual needs asked about their own existence. That's a central theme to this film. And sometimes people don't understand why they like going around and blowing people's heads off for fun, virtual people. Central to it is it's not real and there's no consequence. But a lot of people just go because it's fun, but they can't really explain why it's fun. And that's why we have experts to try to put words to that and to talk to people and sort of ask the right questions to get people to sort of open up on specifically what need does gaming fulfill for you. And I think that the first role in that is to take the judgment out of it. I mean, that's the first thing we learned in anthropology was, and I know people dump on cultural relativism, but it's an appropriate tool in anthropology where if you go in and tell somebody their culture's bad, well, they're not going to talk to you about their culture. They're going to shut down. So you have to go in with an open mind and sort of see it from the inside and then go back and analyze it later. But you have to go in trying to sort of, get it the way the people doing it are getting it and not sit in judgment of someone else's culture. And there's a lot of judgment of other people's cultures going on right now. And it's getting in the way of productive discussions of gaming. And it's certainly getting in the way about productive discussions of masculinity because we hear a lot about toxic masculinity. We don't hear a ton about healthy masculinity, right? And I think Creed and I think some of the stuff that goes on in video games, I mean, I use the example of Gears of War where, there are those critical moments in the plot where instead of going, hey, walk it off, they, big grizzled war veterans ask each other, are you okay? And, they tell each other it's okay and they connect in that way. And, I think those films for men, about men, that have those moments, we don't like the term safe space, but that's what they are. They're sort of a safe emotional space of, hey, I can express emotions, but I'm not effeminate and I'm not gay, it's that sort of thing. I mean, fortunately, we're getting more comfortable with people who are gay, so that's less of an issue now. But you know what I mean. It's that, I don't want to get into the masculinity so fragile thing, but most men want to be masculine and most women want to be feminine. They want to feel like they're successful at their role in the world. And that's not weird and that doesn't make them lesser. It's just human. And I think that expanding the definition of masculinity, expanding the definition of femininity is important so that, because you don't take away the urge to feel like a real woman or feel like a real man. And I know this because I've struggled with this my entire life. I don't like the things that girls are supposed to like. For most of my life, I couldn't stand them. I've softened on them as I've got older and sort of more intellectual in my approach to things. But when I was a kid, oh God, get me away from pink, get me away from Barbies, get me away from the girl things. He-Man was awesome. She-Ra was boring in my mind. And I'm not saying that's right. I'm just saying that's the way I was wired. And I think that a lot of guys struggle with this as well, that they don't want to admit they have certain feelings, or they don't want to admit that they want certain things, or they have these failings, because then it's like, well, you're not a real man. And, unless you're somebody on the internet pretending to be a gender you're not, you're a real man. I mean, that's a nonsensical statement on its face, but it's used with such power. And Creed, the movie, it deals with class, it deals with family legacy, it does deal with race, it deals with some cultural appropriation in an interesting way through the guys that Adonis Johnson, aka Adonis Creed, fights in the various. He does 2 matches in the movie, and they're both juxtaposed in really interesting ways. And I'm like, oh wow, that was subtle, but that was cool. And so I recommend you watch the movie, And I hope you found this really tiny discussion of some of the clobber words we have to remove from the discourse, um, of video games and films like this. I hope you found it helpful. It's funny that the term toxic masculinity itself has become toxic, but it has. So we need to, I guess, toxic aspects of masculinity is easier for a lot of people to swallow because they don't hear it as everything about masculinity is bad. There's some very good elements of masculinity. And I think it's just as important to talk about that stuff and make films about that stuff and make video games about that stuff. That urge to keep your family safe. That's not, an inherently masculine tendency, but that is more associated, that sort of physical defense thing. It's more associated with masculinity. That's a positive thing. That certain brand of selflessness is positive. Sacrifice, duty, all these things are not inherently masculine, but as part of a masculine identity, they're very, very important and they're very positive. And I think it's important in this discussion of gender and this, discussion of the gender binary, not to take that away from guys, because it's important. It's important that people understand what's good about their given role in society, because there is good. Of course there's good. Like, it's so crazy that, and I think that when we get into this analysis, we forget that a lot of people deal with a lot of garbage in their lives, and most somebody who can just, toss off, oh yes, toxic masculinity. A lot of the guys who can say that, and not recoil, have a fairly privileged lifestyle. And so they can stop and they can look at the stuff, and they don't need to be told there's positives to their existence. They're reaffirmed with that through their own privilege, right? A lot of the working class lifestyles that don't go on to university, or certainly don't take humanities, they can't afford to. They can't afford to get a degree that's just a piece of paper that you can go on to get another degree. They need something that they can use right away because they don't have the money to continue. The guys that can't hear the term toxic masculinity too much because they live in toxic environments and they're not given a lot of positive reinforcement, and we need to start reinforcing the good that comes with manhood, as well as this, predator antagonist sort of role that we get in these gender analyses. So, hope you found that interesting. Hope you found it informative. It's my first kind of attempt at the other side. I think it's due. And yeah, I went easy on it. I didn't really get into critical theory because I don't want to spoil the movie, and I think we need to get the basics down before we continue. So thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Hope you found it helpful.